The world only believes what the media tells them to believe, and I tell the media what to believe. It's really quite simple.
The war is going badly for the Ukrainian army and its paramilitaries, despite billions in economic aid and military hardware being sent in from the West. This conflict is a proxy war between the USA and Russia, only the USA is hiding behind NATO, which is employing Ukrainians to operate the guns and die on behalf of the Atlanticist powers. The elites are trying to rally support for this war and get NATO directly involved by antagonizing Russia and pushing propaganda through the mainstream media in all Western countries. The West is winning the PR war, but Russia is winning the actual war, as they grind down Ukrainian forces in the Donbass, which is where all of its best divisions are. So far, all the false flags in Ukraine have failed. From Bitchute to Mariupol, all these fabricated stories of Russian atrocities have not been successful in gaining public support. Also, these stories of Hollywood-type heroism from the Ghost of Kiev to Snake Island have all been debunked, and were literally made up, and despite even the MSM admitting this, some people still parrot these events as fact. Behind every major conflict where the USA has been a belligerent side, there was a false flag, going all the way back to the Spanish-American War of 1898, when the USA first embarked on imperialism as it became interested in Spanish colonies in the Caribbean and the Pacific. Spain was in decline, and America sensed weakness. The USS Maine exploded mysteriously in Havana Harbor. Of course, the Spanish were blamed for this, and public support for war was gained with the help of yellow journalism and propaganda, with the usual accusations of atrocities and aggression towards the poor Cubans who desperately needed America to save them from their oppressive occupiers and bring democracy and freedom. Barely 20 years later, the sinking of the Lusitania was used as a pretext for America's entry into World War I. And again, just over 2 decades after that, it was Pearl Harbor. This time a much bigger sacrifice was needed in order to bring America into war with not only Japan, but also Germany once more. World War I had been so unpopular that they really needed to sell it to the public, which is why so much destruction was allowed, and they made sure the aircraft carriers were out of harm's way, as they were not in port at the time of the attack. Just some miraculous coincidence, I'm sure, but these were crucial and could not be sacrificed. Barely 5 years after World War II ended, America was dragged into yet another war, and again a false flag was conducted by the South Koreans, causing North Korea to launch an attack to which the USA had to get involved in order to, quote-unquote, stop communism from spreading. This war had barely ceased when Vietnam began bubbling beneath the surface, as the French, also an Atlanticist power, were struggling to keep control over their colonies in Indochina. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was the pretext this time. Vietnam became extremely unpopular, and the American public would not tolerate such loss of life and destruction, and this was, for the first time, very visible to most people with huge media coverage, resulting in massive protests. For the first time, it was clear that America was not a force for good in the world, as it dropped bombs on children. After Vietnam, the warhawks in Washington had to change their strategy. The first Iraq War was approved by the UN Security Council, so a false flag wasn't really needed, as Saddam had simply invaded and occupied Kuwait. However, he was goaded into doing so, but that's for another video. Then came 9/11, which was used twice, once for Afghanistan and again for the second Iraq War. I guess they ran out of ideas this time. And of course there was the weapons of mass destruction narrative used in case there was any doubt that Saddam was somehow a threat to American security. Next came Libya and Syria. The former was destroyed quite easily. The latter, although badly damaged, survived the onslaught, thanks to Russia and Iran, who basically saved Syria from total annihilation. USS Maine, the Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, the Gulf of Tonkin, weapons of mass destruction, 9/11. The Atlanticists are a one-trick pony. Together with their media allies, the deep state has been starting wars for over 120 years and cost millions of lives. And now they are trying to convince us that Russia is the enemy and Putin is this power-hungry madman who wants to conquer the world. Talk about projection. We are being propagandized into supporting an all-out war with Russia, but public opinion is losing traction, and although most people, it would seem, do support Ukraine, they do not support a direct NATO intervention. The Atlanticists have a small window of opportunity to create some kind of false flag event that would drastically change the situation, because so far the economic war of attrition has backfired, as we see Russia's economy not only recover, but strengthen, whilst the West falls into recession. Russia is also winning politically and militarily, as Putin has an over 80% approval rating, and his military keeps inflicting crushing defeats on the Ukrainians. The West is getting increasingly desperate as their military aid is not working. Their populations are not in support of getting directly involved, and their economies are tanking. The only thing that would gain enough support would be if there was an attack on American soil or a large number of American citizens somewhere in the world. A 9/11 type event, the sinking of a cruise ship, or even an aircraft carrier, or some other capital ship in the US Navy. They may even take down a passenger jet, like they did with MH17 in 2014. So I believe within the next 2 to 3 months we will see such an event, and it will be carried out by the CIA and Mossad, and the blame will be pinned on Russia. Russia is a powerful country with a large nuclear arsenal, therefore an enormous false flag will be needed at this point, and those in power are insane enough to sacrifice thousands of American and European lives just so they can get us into a war with Russia. And if this happens, things will go nuclear. The question is, what, where, and when will this happen?
Every day, no fear in my heart, pain, schizophrenia, one inch, so if you got no time.